Have you ever stopped to think why certain people just can't erase you no matter how hard they try? Could it be because you carry something that the spiritual world respects? Even hell? If this question stirred something inside you, then this video is for you. And no, it's not here by chance. There is a greater purpose behind every click, and yours now is to awaken to who you truly are. So leave it like in this video if you feel you have been chosen. Subscribe to the channel now and activate the bell, because in this video you will understand why even enemies can't touch you. And I want to see you in the comments. Write the number 22 so I know that you are part of this generation that carries purpose and truth in its gaze. Share this video with someone who needs this urgent message, because it may be the answer they have been asking God for. Now, take a deep breath, because what you're about to hear next can change the way you see your life. Have you ever heard of people who carry such intense energy that the very environment changes when they enter? Now imagine a soul so marked by God that even the darkness hesitates before approaching. This is the power of the chosen one. It's not about perfection or religious titles, but about an anointing that cannot be bought or forged. When heaven stamps you with the seal of mission, all of hell is obliged to respect the territory. Not every attack planned against you has come to fruition. Many have collapsed before even getting close because there was a no touching written in the invisible. It's frightening to think of how many times you were on the verge of destruction, but something, or rather someone, intervened. While others were struck down, you were simply diverted. It wasn't by luck. It was by divine jurisdiction. You walked around with open wounds and a weary soul, thinking you were on your own, but behind the scenes, heaven was on guard. The enemy studied you, but didn't dare touch you directly. He knew that to mess with you was to mess with a direct line to the throne. You are more than protected, you are preserved. And most intriguingly, you didn't even know how high your spiritual standing was. While you were constantly trying to understand why people would distance themselves from you or attack you for no reason, the spirit world was already treating you like a high-risk agent. You were the reason for emergency meetings in the realm of darkness. And not because you were loud, but because your silent existence carried a power that broke invisible chains. This isn't just survival, it's spiritual warfare, and you've already won several without even realizing it. They thought they were dealing with just another face in the crowd, a friend to be used, a lover to be discarded, a relative to be silenced. But what they didn't know was that they were dealing with sacred territory. Your presence brought peace that didn't come from words, healing that didn't come from medicine, and alignment that didn't come from logic. You were the turning point in their lives, the link between chaos and new beginnings. But behind the ordinary appearance there was a divine mission, and they disregarded it. It wasn't just you they lost, it was the favor that accompanied you, the energy that transformed environments, the invisible shield that protected even them while you were around. It was your prayer that kept doors open, your presence that warded off storms, your loyalty that held together broken bridges. When they left you, it wasn't just a goodbye. It was an unconscious renunciation of divine access. And now they live in an emptiness they can't explain, longing for something they can't name, the touch of God that came through you. Their lives became a silent regression, not by curse, but by disconnection. Because by treating what was divinely sent as disposable, they lost the flow of blessings that walked with them. They traded gold for emotional trinkets. And now they are stagnant, watching from afar the evolution of the one they swore was irrelevant. Because when you reject a gift from heaven, heaven responds, not with vengeance but with absence, and this absence weighs like no human punishment. There were times when you felt like you were on the verge of collapse. The threats piled up, the attacks intensified, and it seemed like everything around you was crumbling. But curiously, it never went beyond that. The blows came, but they didn't land as they should. The words hurt, but they didn't destroy you. The losses came, but you still breathed. This is more than resilience. This is a heavenly force field, a spiritual boundary imposed by God himself. Many plans against you have failed before they could even be executed. People have tried to shame you, demean you, manipulate you, and ended up falling into their own traps. The reason? You operate under a higher law. There is a spiritual clause on your life that says, untouchable without divine permission. Evil approaches, but encounters an invisible wall. You are consecrated ground, a moving altar, and to tamper with you is to cross a line established by heaven. And even when you didn't understand it, even when you asked yourself, why me? There was a silent army working on your behalf. You weren't protected because you cried out loud, but because you were chosen before you even understood the weight of your calling. Your suffering had a time to begin and a deadline to end. Because even hell knows, messing with the chosen one out of time is a declaration of war against heaven, and the enemy doesn't want to buy that war. The strategy was clear. Silence you. They thought that by pushing you down, they would extinguish your light. They tried to tarnish your reputation, sabotage your opportunities, destabilize your mind, all in the hope that you would disappear, lose yourself, become nullified. But what they didn't know is that each attempt at destruction was actually a divine impulse for your elevation. They were digging your grave, but God used every shovelful of dirt to propel you higher. While they celebrated your apparent downfall, you were silently being refined. While they accused you, you were being polished. What seemed like the end was just the intermission before the show. You didn't explode with revenge, you didn't respond with fury, you responded with growth. You grew in wisdom, in spirituality, in purpose, and now they watch in bewilderment, because what they buried has blossomed. What they tried to extinguish has become a beacon. You are the light that never goes out because it doesn't depend on external energy. And most symbolic, you won without leaving your seat. You didn't need to seek revenge, just stay. And that's exactly what derailed them, because those who win in silence win twice. Now the stage is yours, not to flaunt your ego, but to show that no attempt at destruction can stop a plan that comes from above. They didn't erase you. They accidentally turned on the spotlight. Disrespecting something sacred has consequences that go beyond the physical realm. They thought they were dealing with just another friendship, just another relationship, just another disposable connection. But you were an altar. You were access. You were spiritual cover. And by scorning, mocking, or manipulating you, they weren't just hurting you. They were violating a heavenly principle. Heaven watches how its chosen ones are treated, and when it sees dishonor, it reacts. What many don't understand is that there are connections sent by God with strategic purpose. You were that. A connection sent to heal, align, unblock. But pride, ego, and superficiality caused them to treat with contempt what they should have honored. Now, the absence weighs heavily. The void isn't just emotional, it's spiritual. The blessing they held in their hands has become a constant reminder of what was lost. It's not about revenge, it's about spiritual justice. Because when someone mistreats a gift, the universe responds with silence, closed doors, and inexplicable delays, and they will live with it, with the memory of what they ignored, with the pain of seeing you prosper, not as a provocation, but as a consequence of having been faithful to your mission. You weren't just someone. You were the link to what they asked God for, and refused without realizing it. You didn't just survive the chaos, you were shaped by it. Every tear that fell silently watered the seeds of something greater, something you didn't even know you carried within. The pain that was meant to kill you became fuel for a sacred process, divine mutation. Where many languished, you grew. Where the minds of many faded, yours became clear. You passed through the valley of the shadow of death, but emerged with the eyes of an eagle and the heart of a lion. It wasn't easy. The process tore at your core, dismantled your identity, tore at your soul. But it was in this place of darkness that God lit the torch of revelation. There, without an audience, without applause, you were transformed. It wasn't an aesthetic transformation, nor a behavioral change. It was a spiritual restructuring. Your mind expanded to dimensions most don't even know exist. Your intuition blossomed. Your spiritual perception was unlocked. That sensitivity that made you feel fragile became your strength. You don't just sense surroundings. You read codes. You decipher vibrations. You discern lies disguised as affection. All of this was born of pain. Pain initiated you into a secret school, a celestial academy where only the chosen are enrolled, and suffering is the most rigorous teacher. But the diploma from this school doesn't hang on the wall. It manifests in spiritual authority. Today you are unrecognizable to those who knew you before the pain, and that's why some have drifted away. They can no longer connect with the current version because it no longer belongs to their own plane. You have been elevated, not just socially or emotionally, but spiritually. Your mutation was not visible to the fleshly eye, but felt throughout the realms. The pain, which seemed like your end, was only the initial stage of your ascension. And now you walk with scars that speak, eyes that see beyond, and a presence that shakes the spiritual world. You haven't just overcome, you've transcended. You never needed to point out anyone's flaws. Your mere presence was enough to make them uncomfortable, but it wasn't out of arrogance or hubris. It was because you reflected truths many prefer to keep buried. You were, unwittingly, a spiritual mirror, a reflection of authenticity in a world full of masks. They didn't hate you for who you were, but for how you made them feel about who they themselves couldn't be. Your light exposed the shadows they pretended not to carry, and that, for many, was unbearable. You entered rooms and without saying a word, tensions would build, because you carried peace, and peace disturbs those who thrive on chaos. Your humility dismantled others' pride. Your consistency made noise in the silence. While they competed for attention, you grew in silence. This shattered the system of comparison they used to measure worth. You weren't playing their game, but you kept winning, and this made them bleed inside, not because of you, but because they couldn't bear the reflection of what they still needed to heal. And that's why so many walked away. Not because you'd changed too much, but because staying close to you required them to confront their wounds, their inner lies, their own evolutionary failures. You weren't toxic. You were too transparent for a world programmed for concealment. Your truth was cutting, your essence was revealing, and your authenticity, a wake-up call to dormant consciences. You were the mirror they preferred to break rather than face. But the truth about mirrors is that, once cracked, they still show pieces of reality. And now, even far from you, they can no longer escape the image you've awakened. Many ask God for deliverance, for a fresh start, for a chance to escape toxic cycles and repetitive patterns. What they don't know is that sometimes this answer comes in the form of a person, and that person was you. You were the open door, the new path, the escape route. But they refused, not because they didn't need it, but because they weren't ready to pay the price of freedom. Because freedom demands confrontation, demands change, demands renunciation, and they preferred the familiar chains to the unknown liberator. You arrived with love, with vision, with firmness. You challenged the excuses, shattered the false narratives, and exposed the destructive patterns. And so you were seen as bothersome, as overbearing, as difficult to deal with. But in truth, you were the one fighting for them more than they themselves. You saw what they couldn't, and yet they closed their eyes to the opportunity you represented. They were so accustomed to suffering that they began to call captivity home. And when freedom knocked on the door, they thought it best not to open it. Today they live trapped in the same cycles. They sit in the same pain, drowning in the same excuses, because it wasn't you who abandoned them. It was they who couldn't hold the hand God extended through you. And most tragically, they now realize what you meant. You were the escape, the exit route, the miracle in human form. And because they don't recognize it, they remain trapped in what they swore to hate. Your absence has become the echo of a wrong choice. And you? You keep walking. Because those born to free cannot remain trapped trying to convince those who love prison. They didn't realize it, but by turning against you, they weren't just rejecting a person. They were sabotaging their own chance at redemption. You were sent as an answer, not to punish, not to judge, but to intercede, love, and restore. Your presence carried silent healing, prayer disguised as an embrace, spiritual covering in the form of care. And yet, they chose to betray you. They chose to vilify you, distort you, exclude you. It was more than personal pain. It was a spiritual betrayal. They were sent to be covered, and they chose to uncover themselves. You saw their flaws and still chose to stay. You saw their trauma and decided to love harder. You knew their baggage and still wanted to carry it with you. But ego, envy, and emotional blindness spoke louder. And now they're feeling the weight of absence. Because you weren't the one who just prayed. You were the one who held open doors in the spiritual world. Your connection was an alliance with the higher. And by cutting you off, they disconnected from the network that sustained them. And the price is being paid not in words, but in silent collapses. Today, every fall, every closed door, every inexplicable crisis carries an invisible signature, the abandonment of the grace that accompanied you. And even if they try to retrace their steps, the original path is broken, because redemption came and was rejected, and now time cannot be reversed. They didn't just betray someone. They rebelled against God's plan of restoration. And this kind of rebellion brings consequences that no apology can erase. The judgment didn't come from you. It came from heaven, which saw everything. And now, they are reaping the harvest of what they sowed with neglect. While you fought for your sanity, they were laughing. Your pain was the subject of conversation. Your sadness fueled group laughter. Your downfall an unheralded spectacle. You wept in the dark, and they mocked in the light. Not out of overt cruelty, but out of an emotional coldness that only exists in hardened hearts. They weren't bothered by your suffering. They fed on it. And this truth hurts more than the original pain itself. Knowing that, while you bled in silence, there were those who were applauding the tragedy you were trying to overcome. But God saw. He was there. In the dark room, in the bathroom with tears, on the pillow that dried his pain. And as the laughter echoed, he took note. Because heaven does not ignore mockery directed at his chosen ones. God not only comforts those who suffer, he honors, he exalts, he responds. And now, the table is being set. The same people who found humor in his fall can no longer pronounce his name without choking on their own shame. Their silence today is not maturity. It is weight. It is shame. It is the echo of a conscience beginning to understand the magnitude of their error. They used your pain as entertainment. But now your victory is the new spectacle, and they watch in silence like an audience that has lost the right to applaud. Because when God exalts, he makes sure it's in full view of everyone, especially those who mocked the process. You don't need to fight back. Your evolution is the answer. Your peace is justice. Your prosperity is the most poetic punishment. Because when they mock a chosen one in the desert, they're forgetting that this same chosen one will be king in the palace. And the stage is now yours. You didn't enter people's lives by chance. You were a test, a divine experiment where your presence would be the balance between heaven and human choices. God sent you as a camouflaged opportunity, not wrapped in pomp or titles, but in authenticity, silence, and truth. And that's precisely why so many failed. They didn't recognize the value of what was simple. They didn't realize they were before someone carrying the weight of a heavenly mission. You were the answer they asked for, but rejected because it didn't come in the package they expected. And the test was failed, not by you, but by them. They thought you were just another person, easy to replace, easy to erase. But while they mocked your simplicity, they ignored the magnitude of what you carried. You were purity in a world of appearances, discernment, in an environment of confusion. And this exposed everything they pretended to be. The rejection you felt wasn't personal. It was revealing. God allowed you to be underestimated so that their hearts could be revealed. And now as you rise, they remain rooted to the ground, lamenting the chance they wasted, not to be by your side, but to have been approved for a mission that required honor and discernment. Today your life has become a testimony. Your ascension has become a living lesson, not to humiliate, but to teach. God is using you as an example of obedience, endurance, and faithfulness. Because heaven does not exalt egos, it exalts those who endured the furnace without blaspheming. And you didn't just pass the test, you became your own curriculum. Every step you take now is a lesson. Every victory of yours is a reminder that God promotes those he himself has trained in the occult. You weren't just tested, you were transformed. And now you are living proof that divine favor doesn't need an audience. It only needs a purpose. You didn't shout, you didn't accuse. You didn't even need to speak much. Your energy spoke before any words, and that was what was frightening. You carried a spiritual frequency so high, so pure, that your mere presence was enough for masks to begin to fall. And this generated discomfort, because the world has learned to live on appearances, on superficialities, on relationships based on performance. But you arrived with truth, with depth, with light, and light reveals. Light disturbs those who live in the shadows. Some said you were too intense or too spiritual, too complicated, but none of that was real. The problem wasn't you. The problem was that being close to you required authenticity, required healing, required confronting wounds, and most people aren't willing to do that. They prefer to live in the characters they've created, in the narratives they've invented to justify their own stagnation. And you, effortlessly, dismantled all that, with a look, with silence, with your simple presence. You weren't just a person. You were an activator, a mirror, an access key, and that's why they ran away. That's why they made excuses. That's why they defamed you, not to expose you but to justify their separation. Because if they told the truth, that they couldn't handle the reflection you caused, they would have to admit the problem was never you. And now they live amid their own lies, trying to redo their emotional makeup, while you continue on your journey ever lighter, clearer, more authentic. Your frequency continues to cleanse environments, shake structures, and heal without fanfare. Because you didn't come to fit in, you came to transform. There came a time when you thought the pain would never end, that suffering had become a life sentence, that living in blood was the new normal. But heaven had other plans. Your pain, though legitimate, had a deadline. There was a spiritual clock ticking away behind the scenes of the invisible, and when the time came, everything began to crumble. Hell intensified its attacks, the betrayals increased, the pressure seemed unbearable. It was clear you were near the end of the war, and when the end of the pain approaches, the enemy despairs. The pain wasn't random. It was pedagogical. It was formative. It taught you to discern, to filter, to separate the eternal from the fleeting. It was pain that forged you in silence. And when the time came for a turning point, heaven said, "Enough." And as if in a breath, you began to awaken, to see with different eyes, to listen with a different sensitivity, to walk with a new firmness. It wasn't magic. It was spiritual maturity. The pain fulfilled its purpose. And like a soldier who survives battle, you now bear scars that tell stories, not of weakness but of authority. Today, what once crushed you now strengthens you. You look back not with trauma, but with gratitude, because if it weren't for that pain, you would still be in ignorance. You would still be surrounded by people who didn't deserve your presence. You would still be in cycles that stole your soul. The pain freed you, and more than that, it repositioned you. You understood it wasn't forever. It was just a season, and now that it's past, you walk in a new time, a time where those who tried to break you see that all they did was prepare you for fulfillment. The pain had a deadline, but the glory that came after is eternal. They thought they were playing with feelings, that it was just another story, another game of control, manipulation, and inflated ego. But they were messing with something they didn't understand. Because you weren't just someone with good intentions, you were divinely chosen, you were sent, you were purpose incarnate. And when you hurt a chosen one, you don't just hurt a heart, you hurt a plan, you tear a spiritual contract, and heaven doesn't ignore this. Heaven records it, heaven responds, and God's response doesn't come as revenge, it comes as justice. You were wounded in a cold, calculated and sneaky way, hurt by the one who was supposed to protect you, betrayed by the one you truly loved. But you weren't alone. Heaven watched it all. Every tear, every silence, every plea unheard by men was echoed before the throne. And God didn't just wipe away your tears, He acted. He turned the tables. He exposed you not to justify you, but to reveal truths. And now those who hurt you feel the weight of their error, not by your hand, but by the hand that holds the scales of the universe. They feel the absence of peace, the closing of doors, the collapse of alliances, because there is a price to pay for touching what God protects, and that price is not symbolic, it is real. It is the echo of the harvest of a seed planted in darkness. You didn't ask for it, you didn't even desire it, but divine justice is not optional, it is inevitable. And today, you walk lightly, with restored honor, with a sparkle in your eyes, because you were not just healed, you were exalted. And heaven makes a point of showing that touching a chosen one comes at a high price. You didn't ask for applause. You never needed an audience. While many screamed to be seen, you hid to survive. But even in silence, you were seen, not by men, but by God. And that was enough. Because favor doesn't need a campaign. It doesn't depend on social media. It's not for sale. It is granted by spiritual merit. And you, even broken, even invisible to the eyes of the world, continued to plant fidelity. You continued to sow truth, and now you are reaping what heaven has prepared away from the cameras. Today your life screams without you having to raise your voice. Your brilliance is disturbing not because you show off, but because your light is genuine. Those who tried to diminish you now watch your rise without understanding how you got there, and the answer is simple: favor. Favor that cannot be bought, that cannot be sabotaged, that cannot be negotiated with influence or status. Favor that comes from the throne, that manifests itself in doors that open by themselves, in peace that cannot be explained, in success that seems disproportionate to your trajectory. But nothing is disproportionate to those who were faithful in the desert. You are living proof that God doesn't need anyone's permission to honor you, that other people's opinions have no weight in the divine plan, that being invisible to the world never meant being forgotten by God. Your brilliance today is justice. Your evolution is a response, your peace is a sign, and your journey a constant reminder that heaven still rules. You didn't win because you wanted to prove a point. You won because you stood firm when everything around you screamed surrender. And now your existence is the most powerful sermon many have ever heard, without you having to say a word.